Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with legendary jazz musician and composer Eddie Daniels. Prior to the 2020 election and the COVID-19 pandemic world, we talked to him about his latest 2020 CD, Night Kisses, featuring David Grusin and Bob James, and it's out on Resonance Records. This album comes off the heels of 2018's Grammy-nominated album, Heart of Brazil. He was born in New York City and became interested in jazz as a teenager and was moved by Frank Sinatra. His first instrument was the alto sax. He's got a great story. Enjoy.
Let's do our thing. You know, I'm ready for you.
So let's talk about your Night Kisses. Wonderful album, wonderfully produced, a lot of sounds. I've really enjoyed it. It's a tribute to Ivan Lins. Talk to me a little bit about why you felt impelled to pay tribute to him.
Well, that was more George Claiborne's idea. It wasn't my idea. George Claiborne is the producer and the owner of Resonance Records, and he lived in Brazil when he was a kid. So the album before this, do you know my Egberto Gismonti album called Heart of Brazil? Well, that was the first in this sequence of albums, and so George loves Brazilian music, as do I. You know, and it's almost like he handed me a project and he said, dive into this, and I dove like a mother.
Well, you know, the one thing about Brazilian music is there's such a happy feel to it. There's almost a timelessness to it. Why do you like it so much?
I like the rhythm, and I feel the culture. I feel the smell of Brazil, the good part of the scent of Brazil, Brazilian culture, Brazilian rhythm. I think a culture is really reflected in the rhythm of the music. It's almost like, I'm a guy from New York originally. Jazz is part of our culture in the United States, and that jazz actually, when it was in the 40s and 50s, jazz was a little more popular. That was our culture. You could feel it with America. Jazz is unmistakably American. But it's also, I wouldn't say it's only American. It belongs to everyone, but it felt to me like Charlie Parker, Coltrane, Stan Getz, Bill Evans, all the guys that are, it was an American cultural product, and Brazil's music has stayed pretty much the same, no matter who the artists are. The feeling of the culture in the music still is there, and so I'm in love with it. I've been playing Brazilian music all my life. So, I'm a big fan of the rhythm, the culture, the feel, and, of course, the composers are fabulous. Ivan Lins' music is unbelievable.
So what was it like to make this album with Dave and Bob?
Well, it was actually, it was kind of my choice, because we were going to go do this album, and Dave is a dear friend and was one of my bosses and supporters at GRP Records, where I made 7 or 8 albums, thanks to Dave Grusin. Him being one of the GRP is Grusin Rosen, so he was half of that company. And Bob James was CTI Records. I used to go record for Bob all the time on a lot of his albums. I was one of the reed players. And so here, where I'm having my moment, I felt like these are 2 guys, number one, never played together, ever. They're friends, but they were never on an album together. So I got them both to come and play with me. I loved it.
What does it feel like to release an album during a global pandemic and all of this cauldron of things happening in America?
Well, it feels good in a sense, because here we are trapped. We're all trapped. Everything's limited. There's no music happening. And this album was done right before the pandemic. So it's taken about a year to produce it, get the notes, and do everything. And now it comes out. So it feels like I have a presence, because people like yourself listen to it and love it. And I feel like, I'm still here. I'm still here. People are hearing my music on the radio. They're liking it. I can't go out and play anywhere. I won't. But my music is being played. So it's there. I'm so thankful that I have this record to keep to share the music with people. And it's beautiful, loving, romantic, jazzy, Brazilian. It's a very special album, very special album. I think it's my best album.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And the one thing I got to say for being a radio guy, it has been refreshing through the pandemic to keep getting CDs and to keep getting links and to keep getting music. So thank you for keeping the world of jazz rotating in the right direction.
Well, thank you.
So how have you been doing during the pandemic? I mean, and I'm going to preface this with this question here. I have historically asked musicians that have been very storied like you, that have been around for a long time, like, how healthy is jazz? It's been a question. I never have to ask that again. The amount of times that one, like how
healthy is jazz?
But I don't have to do that anymore. I just don't. I know now because of the amount of shows that musicians have had to cancel. I never have to ask that again to a musician. Have you thought about how much just you and fellow musicians have had to cancel during this pandemic?
Absolutely. I'm talking to all my friends all the time. They can't work. I can't work. The last gig that I was going to do was Labor Day at the Detroit Jazz Festival, and with Bob James, actually, with our quartet. And I didn't want to get on a plane. It ain't worth dying for. I want to be able to give more music to the public, And so the festival was quite all right with it. I'm very close with the director of the Detroit Festival, and it's like that with all gigs. We're all in the same boat. But the good part is I love music. I practice during the day. You're going to ask me, what do? I am practicing my instruments. I'm practicing the one instrument that made an appearance on this album that people haven't heard me play in 30 years. What was that, Joe?
You play the flute.
Yeah, but you see, that's the key. That's the key. I hadn't played the flute for 30 years before this album.
Yeah, well, then there you go.
Well, that's the thing. You, as a person who listens to a lot of music and maybe knows some of my music, I've been mostly a clarinet guy for the last 30 years since I joined GRP back in those days, and some saxophone, but not much. And then I had to do this album of Ivan Lins, and something magical and scary happened. Did you read anything about it in the notes or anywhere around some of the other reviews?
He sent me a link over, and I've read through some of the notes, and just
let me tell you. I'll just give it to you,
Sure.
and you can repeat it. So I was about 3 weeks out from the session, and I'm practicing my clarinet, and my dentist did a bone graft in my mouth and said, you can't play the clarinet for 3 weeks. Of course, it'll go in your sinus, and the clarinet is very resistant when you blow it, so it'll blow out your implant. And so my friend Ron Odrich, who's a very fine clarinetist, said, why don't you practice your flute again? So, when you off the top of your head said, you play the flute, it's kind of funny because that's the first track on the album that uploads the bio is flute. But I hadn't played the flute in 30 years. Wow. And so I started practicing. But I was a good flutist 30 years ago. So I started practicing. I fell in love with it. And I felt, this is perfect for this album. So on the Ivan Lins Night Kisses, when I got to the session, I realized I love having the flute with me. And it's I got my chops back a little bit. If you read the Downbeat review, you get a kick out of it, where he mentions that. So I got into it, and I got playing the flute, and I played 4 tunes on flute, 4 tunes on the clarinet, and 4 songs on saxophone.
Right on.
And I think it worked out, and it got me so excited. I found it's like you found your ex-wife again, It's like the flute was my ex-wife. Not literally, but, someone you bring back into your life. And I started practicing. I'm practicing the flute several hours a day now. That's why being in lockdown, quarantine or whatever is no big deal, because that's what I do in my life anyway. I practice. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious during this time too. Another layer of this pandemic and being in a lockdown is, are there any memories of being on stage? You've been on so many stages in so many places. Do you have any magic moments, any memories that are coming in that are kind of making you, fueling you for when you do return? No.
Well, I had fun in my life and had some good performances, but what fuels me is I have my breakfast, like when you called and I was eating. I didn't have another few bites, and I come into my room, like I'm sitting in this beautiful room right now where I can see mountains. I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's beautiful, a lot of green, even though it's cold today. Like, freezing. I go into my room after I've had my coffee and my cereal, and I start practicing for hours. And I'm loving it. It's almost to the point where you don't need. It's nice to have an audience. Is a great thing to have because you can bounce off of them. We as a culture have a hard time being alone by ourselves. That's why a lot of people in the quarantine go crazy. They don't know what to do. They're sitting around. So I don't sit around. You should see what I bought wreaths of music to practice. On the flute, I'm playing things on the clarinet and on the saxophone, and I'm still excited about music. So I don't think back to a previous performance because I have to do it now. It's like you get in the car, and you can't think of the last time you drove your car so that you could drive it now. You got to drive it. You got to pull out of your driveway. You got to face that oncoming traffic, and you don't think about the past because you're in the now.
Yeah.
And driving a car is a good example of that because you can't shit around. Sorry about that. You can't fuck around, but you don't have to say that either. But you can't screw around. Okay, that's a better word. You can't screw around when you get in the car and cars are coming by and you have to make a turn onto a major roadway. You can't say, well, what was I doing? Years ago, I was such a good driver. No. You're in the present, and that's what music is like. It's almost, I like hearing the album, and I love what happened on this album. I think it was magical in a certain way, but I'm practicing for the next one.
Yeah.
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 And I'm practicing so that I could have my chops right now. So I like to keep my chops. And it's not a matter because I want the chops so that I could go out and play for people. For me and my own psyche, having my chops is important to me.
Yeah.
And playing beautiful music in a room by myself is important to me. And sometimes you go on Zoom, and I've done a couple of things with friends and stuff with, Arturo Sandoval. We did a Zoom thing together, and I'll do stuff like that. But mostly I'm in the room practicing, and I'm not practicing to go anywhere else to do it. I'm just loving it,
Yeah.
So I bring the love of that musical experience when I get into a studio. Everything you accumulate, it's like a bank account, in a sense. Without you even knowing it, you play, you practice, and suddenly you're something. You can play.
Yeah.
And then also you have to keep practicing because you can't play without practicing. So it's a great thing. I wish I could give that gift to everybody so that when we're all crazy in this lockup and we have to be so limited in our choices of where we go and what we do, get an instrument or get a dog. A dog is a good thing to have in the house. We have a great dog. So life is actually okay,
Cool. Well, let me ask you this. When we do return to live music, what do you hope both the audience and the musician gets from this absence of live music?
We realize how much we miss it. We realize how much we love it. And not just live music, live interaction with other human beings. So suddenly, to be able to have an audience in front of you again and, a disease-free, virus-free audience, and we're all not thinking about that, where you can just play again, I think everybody's going to just love it. We're all going to love it. We all got to get back together with each other. Yeah. It's like De Niro was on one of the shows last night, and, he's saying, getting together, being with people is the essence. And but I love the Night Kisses album because it really comes from the heart. It's about the deepest, heartfelt album I have ever done. And it should calm people down because it calms me down. It calmed me down to play it, to be there.
Yeah.
So I want to take the audience with me while they're listening because they're with me. I'm with them. When I'm playing, I am everybody. I'm everyone who's listening,
Yeah. That's a great answer. Great way to wrap everything up. Eddie, thank you for taking
What was the track on there that you liked the most?
I got to be honest with you. I love the way the album starts. You run right into it. There's there's a feeling that you set up initially with this album, and I've listened to it probably about 4 or 5 times. I've listened to it in the car. I've listened to it sitting down.
That's great.
I've really wrapped my head around it, and I really like the way it starts. You set the tone with the instrument, and that's probably why I just immediately said flute, because that's the thing. It's just there's this feeling that you're putting out there. It almost is kind of like you said. It's like rediscovering the love. I think you can feel it because it's a conversation. That's one of the reasons why I was asking about Dave and Bob. I mean, these are good friends, but jazz is a conversation, and what you're doing is you're having a conversation with an old instrument.
And you know, the name of that first tune, A Voz de Povo, is Voice of the People. Yeah. And it's perfect for this time with this election and everything, that people have to be heard.
Yeah. Amen. And keep the faith, man. The future's going to be bright.
Thanks so much. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Eddie for his time, music, and class. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.